talked about just now, we're going to end up using fewer national resources to deliver health care for everyone. So
that's right. Those basically. So how?
So sorry about that. I'm a bit late. I was preparing and I got hung up in preparing for a while. Hi, Dolores. Hi to you on Facebook and hi to you on YouTube. Hi, Kay. Glad to see you here. Hi, Amber. I haven't had much chance to share this, so I'll appreciate it. Okay, if everybody can share to all the various groups. Thank you, Amber. Jeff Denton says, I'll look for some places to share this where Dolores hasn't already. You might share it to Twitter in the Red Beret sector, Jeff. Stacy Van Veen says, good evening. Hiya, Stacy. Nice to see you. Okay, I'm going to start. What I want to start with tonight is actually about, about 2.5 minutes of a video from Stephanie Kelton. I think that provides a pretty good background for this. So let me share the screen. Here we go.
How much would come from increased taxes and how much would come from increased borrowing?
I think the thing is with Medicare for All is that, as we talked about just now, we're going to end up using fewer national resources to deliver health care for everyone. So if you think about it, Medicare for All actually works like a tax cut for 95% of the American people. Why? Because you're going to end up spending, on average, about $3,000 a year less than you're spending today. That's $3,000 that stays in your pocket. It has the same sort of economic effect as if someone cut your taxes and left you with $3,000 more a year. So Medicare for All really does work like a tax cut.
So if that's right, those savings for the entire country have to come from someplace. Somebody has to get less money. Doctors or insurance companies, somebody has to get less money. So who's getting less money? Where does that savings come from?
Well, most of it's coming out of the middleman, right? That's where so much of the overspending takes place today. It's because we have this additional layer. Someone is standing between you and the person on the other end of your health care, right? And that middleman is taking enormous chunks of money, tens and tens of billions of dollars annually that you're paying in the form of premiums, co-pays, deductibles that are being peeled off by the intermediaries, by the health insurance companies, by the pharmaceutical companies. So when you bring down healthcare costs and you start paying less, not just for the care itself, but also for the prescription medications, that all accounts for much of the savings.
So I said earlier, Bloomberg News has called you, I think, the public face of modern monetary theory. As you describe the healthcare, the Medicare for All, it has nothing to do with modern monetary theory.
No, it doesn't.
We won't be borrowing more money.
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with modern monetary theory because we're just talking about a policy proposal that asks how do we transition away from making the payments the way we make them today to a more efficient system where we make smaller payments in the future.
But as I understand modern monetary theory, and I don't understand it the way you do, it basically says a country that has the reserve currency for the world doesn't have to.
Okay, so that's all we have to hear, okay, about that. What Steffi was saying there, okay, is that, well, I think what she was implying, at least, is that there were no deficit spending issues here with respect to Medicare for All at the state level, because Medicare for All at the state level was going to, well, actually not at the state level. She's talking, okay, at the national level, and she's saying that it will save 30%, okay, at the national level. We will spend 30% less at the national level. Now, those kinds of savings will probably not come into play at the state level. That is, okay, it won't be as much. The reason why is at the state level, even a Medicare for All type of program, or a program similar to Medicare for All in some ways, or designed along lines, okay, of Medicare for All, will not have the same bargaining power at the state level. So the savings will be less. How much less? How much less? We cannot say how much less, but the range of savings is probably between 15% and 30%. In other words, if we look at total health care spending, which in the states always goes back to the people because states can't do any deficit financing. So their tax money, the people's tax money, is going to healthcare programs at the state level. So money is coming out of the pocket of people for premiums, for co-pays, for deductibles, and for taxes to pay for services provided by the states. All the dollars then are coming from the people. Now, as Steph said, roughly $10,000 per person is being spent. Did she say that? I'm not certain, but that's the truth. $10,000 per person is being spent in rough terms. If 30% is saved, then $3,000 per person is saved. If 20% is saved, then $2,000 per person in spending would be saved. For Washington State, with roughly 8 million people, if about 20% of the $80 billion it is spending now is saved, that's going to be a savings of $16 billion for the state. For people, when I say for the state, I'm not just talking about the state government, or necessarily primarily talking about the state government, because it's all coming out of people's pockets. People will be saving $16 billion. Now, the real question about whether this will be inflationary or deflationary for the country depends on the fiscal multiplier of the kind of spending that people will do once they have that $2,000 back in their pockets. It's almost certainly going to be a higher fiscal multiplier than is their spending on the healthcare industry, because the healthcare industry distributes what is spent on it hierarchically. There's a very unequal distribution of the gains flowing from some set of people to another set of people, which means the fiscal multiplier of that spending will be lower than it will if the spending is done in different sectors, on different sectors, where the fiscal multiplier is higher. So it's often said, and we'll come to this, okay, in just a minute. Well, in fact, I'm not going to go any further with this at this point. This is just, okay, an introduction. Now I want to get to my critique of what Steve had to say yesterday. Specifically, I've entitled this broadcast, "Will the State-Based Path to Medicare for All Work?" So there's been a tweet war, as many of you know, going on for some days now between the proponents of the whole Washington plan for a Medicare for all type of program for the state of Washington. Okay, there's an initiative that's on the table there that people will be voting on at some point. When they vote on it, should the initiative actually win, then the program described by the initiative will have to be passed into law, okay, in that state. So there's been a battle going on for some time between proponents of MMT from the RP group and people who generally don't know a whole lot about the field, okay, of modern monetary theory, but who know an awful lot about the whole Washington proposal, okay, to create a Medicare for all type of program for the state, okay, of Washington. And these exchanges have gotten quite contentious. As you know, I've talked about the possibility of state-level Medicare for all types, okay, of programs, and I've generally been on the favorable side of trying that. So this is my reply to Steve's argument, and I'm making a point-by-point by reply to his argument. I'm not going to get personal. Okay, I'm not going to use any labeling of his argument without trying to explain why the labeling, okay, is justified. Okay, I'm not going to call him a name, okay, or imply that he's an evil person. I'm not going to appeal to authority, and I'm not going to deliver any ad hominem arguments against Steve. That is not my concern here. My concern is just to go through his argument, point by substantive point, as I heard it from his video, and deliver my responses to those points. So, Steve says, states are currency users, not currency issuers. Of course, I agree. And most of the whole Washington people seem to agree as well. Steve says the federal government can handle all cost issues, such as overruns, unpredictable migrations, etc. States cannot. And again, I agree. And so it appears do most of the whole Washington people. State-level programs will be more fiscally unsustainable than a federal program, which will always be fiscally sustainable. I certainly agree with that, and I think the whole Washington people do too. Now, Steve also says, maybe 4 or 5 states can handle anything like a Medicare for all type of proposal. 46 states could not do it. I think this is wrong, and I will say why presently. States are cutting services across the board. I agree. Most states, probably all states, have been cutting services for some time. Red states are not going to do a Medicare for all program anyway. And again, that's something I agree with. They're not going to do it on their own. You're not going to start any Medicare for all types of programs in the states. Then Steve concludes, so a state-by-state approach is a strategic mistake. And I say no. And later on, I will explain why I think this is not correct, that it's not necessarily, well, I won't even say not necessarily. I don't think it's a strategic mistake. And I will explain why as we go forward. So, let's go into the specifics of the states can't do it argument. And after we go into the specifics of this, I think you'll see there are lots of things that are stated. And I'm going to state each of these things, and I'm going to rebut the point that he makes. States can't resource it, says Steve. Doctors and staff won't be available. Maybe hospitals won't be available. So I say, no, I don't think this is true. It's possible. But I don't think that will happen to Washington, to Oregon, or to California, okay, unless the pandemic or another pandemic scales up again. That, of course, put a burden on hospitals. So pandemics can do that. Extraordinary situations can do that. But generally speaking, day-to-day situations are probably not going to do that for these three states, because Washington, Oregon, and California are fairly prosperous states compared to a lot of the other states of the Union. Steve goes on to say, except for 4 or 5, California, New York, maybe Washington, states can't devote the financial resources to it. Now, when the RP people came to the Red Beret threads supporting whole Washington, they were contending that it would be highly unlikely at it. Some thought it would be impossible for Washington to be successful at it. So Steve is backing off a little here, granting that maybe Washington can be successful. I think that's important to know. But my general answer to this point is no. I think there are many more than 4 or 5 states. And we'll get to that much later. But for now, let us go to more specifics. Steve says, the proof of this is that states have been cutting infrastructure and services all over the country. And I reply, that's not proof. It's due to the political climate in those states. If hashtag M4A is passed at the state level, it will be due to a change in that particular climate. And we are going through a change of climate in the country. Of course, the Republicans are working furiously to try to nullify the effect of the change in the climate of the country. But clearly, compared to 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 15 years ago, there's a much more progressive political climate all across the country. Certainly this is true, okay, in blue states. It's even true in some of the red states. So we're looking at a transition in the political climate. And that may mean that states will no longer be cutting services all over the country. The past is not necessarily prologue to the future. If we thought it was, then we wouldn't be trying to change the past by affecting policy at the federal level. People are also trying to affect policies at the state level as the political climate changes. Washington is one of the most progressive of states, and it is its political climate is moving more to the left, which means that the time of cutting infrastructure and services in Washington may perhaps be ending. In any case, the past there is not necessarily prologue to the future. Steve says, Pennsylvania doesn't have the budget for services, so it makes fracking deals with oil companies, invests in fracking. This is true. But Pennsylvania doesn't have the budget because the wingers have been running it. But Pennsylvania is trending Democratic again. We're seeing this in various state-level campaigns. But of course, the legislature is still an area where the Republicans are ensconced solidly. In part, that's because of the gerrymander. That's because of voter suppression. So what's happening now? Well, much depends on whether the Democrats can get H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 passed. If they can, or get some version of those two bills that solves the problems, then there can well be a new political climate in Pennsylvania and all over the country, because many more people will be voting and many more people are likely to be voting Democratic. We'll have to see whether Democrats get it done. I don't know if they're going to get it done. I'm certainly not optimistic about it, but things have to work on parallel tracks. There's no need for the whole Washington people to stop and wait and see whether the Democrats are successful or not. They have to run on a parallel track. We can't say that track is foolish yet, because the political climate will be changing considerably if H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, their functional equivalents, are passed. Here's some more of the states can't do it argument. States are slashing pensions, school budgets, including services and extracurricular activities. Potholes are everywhere. Yes to both. I certainly agree with that. But a state program like Washington's might save 15 to 30% of what people in Pennsylvania spend on health care, including what they give to Pennsylvania in taxes for health care spending. So if people are going to save 15 to 30% in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's spending on health care from all sources, I'm just going to approximate this. I haven't actually looked it up. But if it's like Washington, they're spending $125 billion right now. So 20% of that frees up about $25 billion for other needs of the people in Pennsylvania, including more government services. Of course, the key to a lot of what I'm saying here is the idea that health care in each of the states, if they adopt a program like this, will cost less, that health care spending will cost less. That means that the shift to the new program is not going to be a burden on a state that takes on this change. It's not going to be a financial burden anyway. So the idea that it's going to require more taxes because it's a financial burden is not necessarily true. And even if it requires more taxes, that does not mean that the overall financial deal the people are getting won't be better, so that their overall burdens won't be less. If they're overall saving, let's say $2,000 a year, okay, on healthcare, That's what they're overall going to save when you take into account taxes and everything else that they're spending now on healthcare. As I pointed out before, it's an average of $10,000 per person. But the savings are the savings, whether they're savings in taxes to the government, or savings in copays, or savings in deductibles, or savings in premiums. They're still coming out of that $10,000 per person. So a financial burden, it ain't going to be. Not compared to the financial burdens that they have now. I don't know why this point seems to be escaping people. It's a very simple point. Here are some other reasons why states can't do it. Did I miss anything here? I don't think so. People are homeless and starving. They're living in squalor, Steve says. Yes, they are. I couldn't agree more. And a new universal health care plan that's free to the homeless and starving is likely to improve their condition. The Arctic is burning. The Green New Deal can't be done. That's all true. But what does that have to do with the states? Don't we want the federal government to be bearing the full burden of the Green New Deal? I mean, the federal government is the currency issuer. I want the federal government to be bearing the full burden of the Green New Deal. I want the federal government to be bearing the full burden of Medicare for all. But the fact is, we haven't been able to get that through Congress. And we don't seem real close to getting that back through Congress. Now, I don't want to go too heavily on it. I know we're having the demonstrations on July 24th, and they're supposed to coincide with an effort by Jayapal and people inside of Congress to create a boomlet for Medicare for all in Congress. I wish them well. I'm totally in support, of this. Now, maybe in the end they'll be successful, and NEMA, National Improved Medicare for All, will pass. Jayapal's bill, H.R. 1976. And maybe it'll pass. Then whole Washington won't have to worry about its state level bill. That'll be great. But the point here made about the Green New Deal isn't relevant with respect to what's going on at the state level. Not if, as we all do, we want the federal government to bear the full burden of the Green New Deal. That burden should be, even though we can't get Biden to go this way, it should be $1.6 trillion a year, in line with Bernie's $16.2 trillion estimate in the campaign over 10 years. Perhaps it should be even more than that. But the point is, that financial burden cannot be borne by states. It should be fully borne by the federal government. Steve says we are not focused. True. But what does that have to do with the whole Washington initiative? What does Steve want us to focus on? Steve says Fadl Kaboub and Bill Black say it's important to know how funding occurs at the federal level. I couldn't agree more. I started blogging about this in 2009, in the late part of 2009. And I've been blogging or speaking about it since. It's very important to know how funding actually occurs at the federal level. I wish everybody would read Stephanie Kelton's great paper on that. I certainly wish they would. And anyway, I certainly agree that all of us should communicate the findings of that paper to everybody we talk to. It would also be great because it would make it clear to states, governments, state politicians, state lobbyists, that they must work on federal support for their programs in Washington, D.C. They must lobby the hell out of Congress to get what they want. Steve says, don't focus on orphan politics. You have to relate everything to everything else. I say, sure. But so what? In general, that's what I do. This is an implication that people at whole Washington are not doing that they're not relating everything to everything else, but that somehow the wise folks, okay, at RP are the only ones relating everything to everything else. If that's what he's trying to imply here, then I would say that is a very unfortunate way to put it. I'm sure the whole Washington people think they are relating everything to everything else. Steve says states are cash strapped, okay, and in a race to the bottom. Right. They are, of course, some states are not in as much of a race to the bottom, okay, for various reasons. Washington may be one of those, but apart from that, advocates for state-level Medicare for All say it will save 15% to 30% for people of that state. So that will ease the race to the bottom, will it not? So why not do it? If states are in a race to the bottom, that's all the more reason why they should be passing Medicare for all types of programs. That only strengthens the argument for Medicare for all. It doesn't weaken the argument for Medicare for all. I have no idea why Bill and Fadl think it does. I listened to Steve's podcast on this. I heard what Fadl said, and I heard what Bill said, and I didn't think their arguments were very convincing. I'm sorry, friends. I don't think your arguments in that podcast were very convincing. They were too abstract, and they were too generalized as well. They didn't speak to the specifics of the situation in the state of Washington. So Steve says, schools are funded by zip code and tax receipts by zip code. Well, yes, they are. But the whole Washington model is funded a different way. So why is it relevant that schools are funded by zip code and tax receipts are collected by zip code? Why is this point relevant? Next point. People are being left behind as industries, people were left behind as industries left these states. Yes, we agree. And we know the story. And we know the causes. And I wrote something on the race to the bottom, but myself, actually. It was, when was it? 2010. I think I co-authored something with Marshall Auerbach about that. Yeah, we know the story. We know the causes. We know how globalization has victimized people in the middle of the country. We know the role of the Clinton administration in that. We know the role of NAFTA in that. We know the role of all the trade agreements which the United States currently has in that. What does that have to do with the price of eggs? Steve says, well, Flint, Michigan, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, jobs gone, services gone, opportunities in the local areas gone, people leaving the area because they cannot find work. So he says, but look across the Midwest. And I say, okay, I'm looking across the Midwest. I have looked across the Midwest. I've been watching the Midwest for years and years and years and decades. I've watched the Midwest go down. At one point, okay, I lived in Buffalo for 6 years. I got married there to Bonnie. We have very good feelings about Buffalo. We have relatives in Buffalo. We're very sorry to see Buffalo continue to struggle for more than 50 years now. I mean, they were in a funk in the middle 60s, and things have been getting worse and worse, okay, and worse. And we're very happy they just elected a socialist mayor. That will probably be wonderful for Buffalo. And we know the jobs are gone. California and Washington under blue sky conditions, maybe they can do that for a while, that being the Medicare for All type of program. My answer, if California, Washington can save money doing it now, why should they wait for blue sky conditions? Steve says, this can never happen for the rest of the country. I say, why not? What if after a few regions are successful, people across the country demand full-blown NEMA, and they don't take no for an answer? What will happen then? I mean, maybe Medicare for All, National Improved Medicare for All, HR 1976 or some successor bill will be passed right then. And will be passed because a few regions modeled it, were successful with it, and people from the rest of the country look at it with envy and demand of their congresspeople that they better damn well vote for NEMA or they're going to kick them out. What about that? Why can't that happen? Why is that impossible? Why is that so difficult to imagine, Steve? State funding is a crapshoot. You don't know if that funding can spark anything. Of course we do. Have you ever read the history of New York State or Pennsylvania? Why is this century different from all other centuries? State funding has sparked plenty of stuff in the history of the United States. We may not know if a specific piece of state funding can spark something, but we do know that state funding in general can spark things. Steve's statement was too unspecific, too general, and too abstract. Those are not the same thing. But they're both too general and too abstract. He's got to be more specific. One of the problems here, no, I'm not going to say that. Going further, Steve says, but we do know that maybe a handful of states can do that. My answer is, you don't know that it is limited to a handful of states. And you don't know whether success in the states that can do it well will spur NEMA in Washington, D.C. Why will it not? Because you don't think that's the right way to go? Have you got some kind of expertise in politics that people in Washington don't have? Or that I don't have? Or that other Americans don't have? Have you got some special knowledge about what the likely future is going to be in America? That you can say that success, let's say in Oregon, Washington, California, and some regional coalition by those states might not spark going to NEMA very quickly? I don't think you can say that won't happen. Steve points out, There's an eviction tsunami coming, and states have been inflating asset values of properties to get more money in taxes. They've been inflating their tax bases. And I say true. But if hashtag Medicare for all says 15 to 30%, then the situation of states will be eased. In other words, the eviction tsunami is no reason not to proceed with a Medicare for all program. Neither is the fact that states have been inflating the asset values of their property to get more money in taxes. I mean, that's true. But how does that point come to bear on whether state level Medicare for all ought to be pursued in Washington? I don't think it does. Steve then says, but all this cooking in the Arctic, it won't matter if we have health care because we're going to be dead. So my reply to that is, first, if there's no state level health care in the states that are able to do state level health care, then many people are going to be dead sooner. And that is going to matter to them. I mean, it may not matter to the general population because the general population is going to be dead if the cooking in the Arctic doesn't stop. And I'm very much for stopping the cooking in the Arctic. And we all are, Steve. We all are. But the fact is that in the short run, if we have that type of healthcare program in the states that can succeed with it, it is going to save lives. If it saves 5 years or 10 years or 15 years of life, it will matter to the people whose lives are being saved. Further, on the other hand, for this to be a problem, Steve has to show that state level Green New Deal, unfunded by the feds, is necessary. But don't you believe, Steve, that the Green New Deal should be entirely federally funded? I certainly do. So why is it a problem that states might choose to fund a Medicare for all type of program? That's not going to take money away from Medicare for all if we're trying to get it funded by the feds, in any case. Steve says, we stand for Medicare for all, hashtag Medicare for all. And I say, sure, so do I. So do the Red Berets. So do the whole Washington people. They stand for Medicare for all too. In fact, there will be Red Berets talking all over the country supporting NEMA on July 24th, Steve. I know you're going to be there, and you're going to be giving an address. But how many RP people are going to be there giving addresses? There are going to be a lot more Red Berets there supporting Medicare for all than there will be our people there RP people that will be giving speeches there supporting Medicare for all. As you said, you are one of only 2 MMT people who will be talking at these events. So there will be more Red Berets than you talking in support. At the state level, it's not just about the cost of the people. It's also about the cost of the infrastructure, building out all of the IT support, okay, that this is going to require. Yes, that is a real cost. But healthcare at $10,000 per person includes the spending on the real infrastructure cost. If the savings are going to be $2,000 per person, then the other $8,000 is going to go for everything else, okay, including the building out of the infrastructure to provide the necessary IT support. I suspect in Washington, they're probably pretty far along in having that support. Don't you suspect that? Steve says, it doesn't matter if it saves businesses money, because what happens then? At a state level, there is less spending going on, so revenues drop. I say, no. At the state level, the money saved by the program is recycled. It is not destroyed as it is at the federal level. Taxes destroy money at the federal level, but they don't destroy money at the state level. He says, we're worried about more than Medicare for all. We're looking at the interleaving of Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, the job guarantee, student debt relief, all that stuff, not orphan politics. Well, Steve, I'm certainly glad that RP is doing that. But I can assure you that I'm doing that too. I'm looking at the interleaving of Medicare for all and Green New Deal and job guarantee and student debt relief and more. I'm not just playing orphan politics here. I doubt that the Red Berets or whole Washington are playing orphan politics too. Just because you're for a particular policy proposal at the state level does not mean you're not thinking about the impact of that policy on all kinds of other issues, including the ones that you've mentioned here. I mean, I'm glad you're worried about that stuff and the interleaving of that stuff. And I assure you, I'm worried about that too. Anyway, looking at the whole progressive agenda, Steve says, if you sabotage the whole thing, you've done irreparable damage. Well, that may be true, but why would whole Washington be sabotaging that agenda? You haven't made that case at all in your live stream. You're just asserting it, just putting forward some vague warning that there's going to be sabotage of the whole thing. You have to make that case, Steve. You haven't made it. Ah, there it is. Sorry, I lost my place for a moment. Here are some more other reasons why states can't do it. Steve says, because physics does not but negotiate, and we've got a climate crisis. And my reply to that is, I certainly agree. We have a climate crisis, and it's the most serious crisis we have. And physics does not actually negotiate. Yes, we all know that. Then Steve says, if you don't see the relationship between MMT and the climate crisis, step away from your keyboard. I don't know if I would quite say step away from your keyboard, but I agree. If you don't see the relationship between MMT and the climate crisis, that's a problem. I think I see the relationship between MMT and the climate crisis. I don't know why Steve thinks I don't see the relationship of MMT to the climate crisis. I suspect I was writing about that relationship long before he was. I'll be happy to match blog posts in that respect to make the point. Anyway, Steve talks about the needs of the progressive agenda being very important. I agree. The needs of the progressive agenda are very important. I don't see how the whole Washington effort damages the progressive agenda. And I don't think you've made the case in your live stream that there is going to be any damage to the progressive agenda. Steve points out Warren Mosler said hashtag Medicare for All has a deflationary bias because people in the insurance industry will lose jobs, as will people dependent on them. So hashtag Medicare for All requires a tax cut, not a tax increase. That is Warren's bias. Warren is biased to having tax cuts. He likes tax cuts. I'm not saying he's for tax cuts for the rich. No. He's for tax cuts for people. He thinks tax cuts are very good for people. I think tax cuts are good, but the fiscal multiplier of tax cuts is not as great as other fiscal multipliers, like fiscal multipliers for spending on the Green New Deal, or just all kinds of different consumer spending in industry areas that don't have the lousy fiscal multiplier of health insurance spending. The amount we spend on the health insurance industry has a very lousy fiscal multiplier. The fiscal multiplier people will deliver by spending very much of what they save from not paying the insurance industry will have a much larger fiscal multiplier. So I think it's doubtful that state level spending on Medicare for All programs will have a deflationary bias. It is more likely that state level spending on Medicare for All will have a deflationary bias when it's done at the federal level. And certainly, I'm a big advocate of more federal spending at the federal level on things like the federal job guarantee that will have a big fiscal multiplier and be very good for the economy, and Green New Deal. So, whether something has a deflationary bias at the state level, at the federal level, I should say, doesn't mean it's going to have a deflationary bias at the state level. Isn't that true, Steve? Okay, so I would say, if there's a deflationary bias, that doesn't mean we should have a tax cut. It means we need more spending at the state level, not necessarily government spending. Whether it's government spending at the state level or people spending, it will counter a deflationary bias. As long as the money is not being saved, we won't have a deflationary bias. So, Steve says, we should be doing whatever we can to prepare the way for rights-based healthcare. And I say right. And whole Washington believes it is doing that. Why do you think that it's not preparing the way for rights-based healthcare? If it succeeds, in doing rights-based healthcare in Washington, certainly that should improve the outlook for rights-based healthcare in other states. Steve says, state by state is a false promise. It won't work that way. What way is my reply? You haven't provided a scenario that won't work. You just assert that something won't. That's all you're doing in that live stream. You're just asserting that things will happen this way and not that way. You're not explaining why that's true. You're not offering explanations. Not really. You're just offering assertions. Assertions aren't explanations. Here are some states that can do it. You'll note there are more than 5. Here are 7 states that I think can do it: California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado. Five are blue states, 2 are swing states. Yeah, blue states, that many blue states. All will want to join a regional, universal healthcare program started by Washington, California, and Oregon. All 7 states will form a risk pool of 69 million people. That's going to give those states considerable bargaining power with the healthcare industry. 69 million people is more people than live in the UK. It's a big risk pool. It's a pool of people with very large purchasing power from the healthcare industry. It's a pool that's going to be able to enable the states to cut their healthcare costs. All these states are prosperous enough to handle it. And if they start up state public banks using pension funds as capital, and those are allowed to become part, that is, the public banks, are allowed to become part of the Federal Reserve System, then the public banks, then the states will have the backing they need from their public banks to survive crises that may cause them to run down their healthcare trust funds. So the combination of the state program with the public bank program can do great things for these states. Now, it just so happens that the person who was introducing the whole Washington plan, who's backing the whole Washington plan, is also the same person trying to get a state public bank started in the state of Washington. Just so happens. There are other states that are prosperous enough, too. They include New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I know you're going to tell me Michigan doesn't have even money to fix the water situation in Flint. Yeah, Michigan is still in thrall to Republicans who gerrymandered of the legislature. But it is again trending Democratic, and it's potentially one of the most progressive states in the Union. So again, if H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 get passed, okay, and the gerrymander goes down, and voter suppression goes down, there will be a new political climate in the state of Michigan again. And then the whole state of Michigan still has enough of a tax base to do what it would need to do with respect to Medicare for all. Why would it want to do that? Because a state-based Medicare for all program will save money. That 15 to 20 to 30% savings would then be available to the people, okay, of Michigan. I think it would be even more savings if NEMA were passed at the federal level. Don't get me wrong. And it would be much more sustainable. And I much prefer it. But still, we have to recognize that states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and all the other states I mentioned are states that could have successful programs. Anyway, 11 of these states are blue states. In the case of Michigan and Wisconsin, they're swing states. The only red state, okay, is Iowa. And the reason why I think, okay, that Iowa would try something like this, if it saw success in a smaller number of those north central states, is because there's been a lot of exposure to Medicare for all, okay, in Iowa, but thanks to Bernie and his two campaigns. There's a constituency there for Medicare for all, in spite of the fact, okay, that it is a red state. And I think if Iowa got a chance to join a regional coalition that was running a Medicare for all program under the ACA, it would certainly choose to join such a coalition because, again, that wouldn't cost people in Iowa money. It would save people in Iowa money. Next, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey are likely to start a regional plan under the Affordable Care Act after they see Washington, Oregon, and California start their Western coalition. As the West Coast Coalition expands to include Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and finally Nevada, the 4 East Coast states would be joined gradually, of course, by Rhode Island, by Pennsylvania, by Delaware, by Maryland, and even by my state, Virginia. Because why not? If those states see people across the country saving $2,000 a person, or $1,500 a person, or $2,500 a person on health care on the average in their states, they're not going to be stupid. They're going to say, why not? When they see it happening, they're going to say, why not? When they see that everybody is covered, and yet there's savings, they're going to say, why not? We're not stupid in Virginia. But okay, I really believe that long before these coalitions in the East take place, when the West Coast coalition expands to include that full 69 million people, that's going to be the breaking point. I think that's going to be the breaking point for NEMA. The other states are going to be seeing that, And they're going to tell their Congress people, we don't care what you say. We want Medicare for all. That's now going to be a litmus test. If you don't give it to us, you spent your last days in Congress. That's what people are going to be thinking. That's what people are going to be saying. That's how people are going to be voting. So my hunch is the Eastern and North Central coalitions are probably not even going to get a chance to form. But if they do form, that's going to even create greater momentum for national Medicare for all. Now, I don't think it necessarily will take place here as it took place in Canada, with the provinces all having programs and then the federal government picking up a part of the tab. In other words, picking up the overage. If the states run out of money, the federal government then spends whatever money is necessary to supplement. That's the way the program is working up there now. That's good. Oh, that's a fine program. But we would have to get a program like that going in 50 states, not 9 provinces, 50 states. Long before that, people in those states that don't have the program are going to be demanding it from their Congress people. They're going to be demanding NEMA. So it's not going to get to the point it did in Canada, where all 9 provinces had a program with the federal government encouraging them and picking up the tab. It's not going to happen that way in our country. Once it reaches the tipping point, it's going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a national program, and the state programs are going to be ending. So that is my scenario. I think the state level programs are steps building momentum for NEMA. That is what I think. But anyway, if necessary, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan, in my scenario, would begin a North-Central coalition when they saw the success of the West coalition and the East's rush to create a coalition of its own. Then I think pressure from their own people would soon cause Iowa and Wisconsin to join up with the other 3 states. And I think that even Indiana and Ohio, red states, would be next to join the North Central coalition. But that would probably take a couple of years. And yes, there'd be fights in those states, and everybody would be saying socialism, 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 socialism. But in the end, they're seeing visible money being saved by people of other states. So there would be a race to the top and not a race to the bottom, because it's a race to save money. That's why that's going to happen in that way. That's why the race to the bottom scenario does not work there. So now I'm going to wind my critique up. In addition to state public banks, state programs can get waivers through the Affordable Care Act to help them financially, yes, to pass through the tax dollars that they otherwise would have had from the Affordable Care Act if they hadn't opted to put together a better program. It's a Democratic administration. Xavier Becerra is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I think he's going to approve such waivers. He's going to approve those kinds of programs. He's going to want to do it. He's going to pressure Biden to allow him to do it, and he's going to do it. Also, states can lobby Congress for category grants. Depending on the administration, states may be able to get them. If #MMT education programs work as we expect, the outlook for such grants would be greatly improved. because everybody would realize that the federal government can't afford such grants. And they're going to want to respond to the state lobbyists coming into Congress, pleading for such grants. But again, much depends on H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. It's a dynamic situation, and all of us are working for the end of austerity in many different ways. One way that's very important is getting H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 passed and getting the filibuster ended. These things are critical. One more point. There's been an objection from people that they say, what happens if the state level program in Washington fails? Then people are going to take that as an example. Okay, and they're going to say, you see, Medicare for all doesn't work. The only way Medicare for all is not going to work, okay, in Washington is because of a possible fiscal sustainability problem that may develop for the states. But what MMT says is that states are not as good as the nation as a whole as places for a Medicare for all program because states have fiscal sustainability problems. So all that's going to do is to validate what MMT has been saying. I mean, MMT will be able to say, we told you so. Now we're telling you that it's going to be successful at the national level because there isn't going to be any fiscal sustainability problem. So the right is not going to get away with pointing to Washington and saying, oh, it failed in Washington. I mean, the easy, response is, yeah, we regret it failed in Washington, but what happened was what we warned against, that there was a fiscal sustainability problem. That doesn't say anything about whether NEMA is going to succeed or fail. That case is easy to make. Easy to make. In a way, you're already making it by warning that Washington's going to fail. So keep on warning that Washington is going to fail. If Washington succeeds, then we'll all be happy. And if Washington fails, well, after all, they weren't a fiscally sustainable political unit. Okay, now that said, there's plenty of evidence that fiscally unsustainable governmental units can do fine, okay, with Medicare for all programs. Jeff Denton has been bringing evidence from all over the world to the Twitter wars, pointing out that all kinds of places that have fiscal sustainability problems have been supporting comprehensive universal health care programs for decades, some approximating Medicare for all, but especially outstanding is the case of Malta that has a national health service that it is supporting with a population of 442,000 people. And Malta doesn't even have a sovereign currency. As I understand it, it uses the English pound. It's not even using its own currency, and it's supporting a national healthcare service. Also, Cuba. Cuba pegs its peso to the dollar. So Cuba's not a currency sovereign. Cuba supports a national healthcare service and has done so for decades. How has it done so and managed to avoid a fiscal unsustainability situation? Finally, my final point, as the pressure from the state programs builds, more and more people will want NEMA, and they can get it at any time after the first coalitions are successful, especially if knowledge about MMT keeps on spreading, because that knowledge will make it clear to people that a NEMA program can never become fiscally unsustainable. And therefore, there is no reason not to pass one. There is no reason not to have one and give everybody health care and spend a fraction of what we're spending now on healthcare spending. All indications are that we could cut 1/3 off of our national healthcare spending if we adopted HR 1976. Might not happen in the first year or the second year of HR 1976. But by the third or fourth year, we're going to get those kinds of savings. How do we know? Because other nations all over the world are experiencing those kinds of savings and more savings. When you look at healthcare spending as a percent of GDP, in places that have fine healthcare programs, Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they all spend 2/3 or less than we spend. Haven't looked at Taiwan expenditures lately, but last time I looked, they were spending something like 1/3 of what we spend. And guess who their Medicare for All program is modeled on? It is modeled on our Medicare program here. All they did was scale it up to everybody and give people the freedom to see any doctor they wanted at any time they wanted. And now 100% of the population roughly is covered by that program, and they spend a small fraction of what we spend. That program in Taiwan was built with the assistance of U.S. consultants during the 1990s who applied the Medicare model before Taiwan. So that's it. That's my argument. Okay, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it can't be refuted. It might, in fact, be wrong. However, what I am saying is that for sure, Steve did not make the case that there was a high level of risk in the whole Washington program. He did not successfully make that case. Nor did he successfully make the case that starting this in Washington and then spreading to other states, especially on the West Coast, would not build up a head of steam for NEMA across the country that could not be denied by the Congress. And that is my final point. Thank you very much. I will now consider your comments. If you're still here. Yes, you are. Thank you for still being here. Okay. So, yeah, you can talk. I haven't finished the stream, but if you want to ask a question, sure.
Is he doing something with you in this?
I'm sorry, who? But Steve?
Yeah.
No, he's not here.
Oh, you're just answering stuff that he wrote.
Right. But not that he wrote. I'm answering points that he made in his live stream. I'm refuting him point by point from his live stream. Okay, back to the beginning again. Stacy says, there is a provision in the ACA that allows compacts between states. It also calls for the block granting of Medicaid money to be ceded in total to the states. Actually, waivers pass through, not simply Medicaid money. So if you took California, Oregon, Washington, D.C., Maryland, New York, New Jersey, well, I don't know. I didn't compute the population for those, but I computed the population for the states that I mentioned, the 7 states that I mentioned out west. That was 69 million people, 70 million people. That's about it's more than 1/5 of the population of the United States. It's between 1/5 and 1/4 of the population of the United States. If you take the other coalition, that I mentioned in the East Coast, that's another 72.5 million people. So 69 and 72 is what? That's 141 million people. 142 million people, something like that. 69 and 72.5. 142.5 million people, something like that. And then you add the coalition in the middle of the country. That does get you to half the population of the United States. The 3 coalitions would be half the population of the United States. Ghostot says, hi all, Hulkamania enters the ring in tonight's Grumble in the Jungle. Steve Day says, I tuned in just in time looking for this tussle. Howdy, folks. Laura Fielding says, I'm here for this. Howdy, Laura. Great to see you. Nothing stopped folks from continuing to push for federal funding for both state and national. We know there's no limit of federal cash for all the different programs. You bet, Amber. Stacey says, everybody leaves Maryland out, but we are the highest income and wealth per capita state. I didn't leave Maryland out. In my account, it was going to be part of the Eastern Coalition. I was in no way trying to leave them out. Steve Wolfbrand says, California tried it, but the head of our Democratic state legislature shot it down. I know. Anthony Rendon shot it down. I know that, Steve. But if it happens in Washington, and Anthony Rendon tries to shoot it down again in California, they're going to roll out the guillotine there for him. Laura says, I'm knitting for national improved Medicare for all while I'm listening. Everyone has agreed that passing NEMA is the very most ideal pathway. We would pass it tomorrow if we could. The votes aren't there, and we have hashtag veto Biden. Yes, exactly. Amber says, isn't there another initiative in California? Ryan Skolnick will know. Stacy says, California spread out, unfortunately, but it could be done. New Jersey is the logical place to start because it is the most dense. Yeah, New Jersey would be a very good place to start, and I had them part of my Eastern Coalition also. And I think also, if New York were to do it, New Jersey would be right along. New Jersey would be right along. There are so many commuters from New York into New Jersey, and they would create such a ruckus in New Jersey if they didn't join a regional plan with New York. It would be crazy. Laura Fielding says, by Red Berets, Medicare for All, and Whole Washington were the first two to be reached out to for partnership by early organizers for M for All, because we were recognized as the real deal. And you are the real deal, Laura Fielding. And Gregory Mallard says, Georgia is trending blue as well. I know it's trending blue as well. And I even have a scenario which I've entertained, which would include North Carolina and Georgia in the Eastern Coalition. I don't think that's too many years away if this really starts up, okay, and if the momentum goes. And Steve Day says, California State Senate Bill 562, I didn't support it at MMT. And Stacy says, so I need a red beret. Yes, you do need a red beret. Bonnie and I are going to get red berets. And Jeff Denton says, the Red Berets is Washington State's national Medicare for All group and has been for years with a gigantic network of Medicare for All advocates all around the country, actually having Red Berets. And our sister organization, Whole Washington, is the glue that binds almost every progressive state group in Washington State at the grassroots level, where change always has to begin to happen first. Laura Fielding says, Whole Washington have organized many events to build support for the federal law. Amber says, yes, that's the linchpin. You can't just ask an entire grassroots movement to stop. And Laura says, Stacy, yes, wholewashington.org. Laura says, we knit and crochet them to help raise money for the ballot initiative, but I'll get back to focusing on Dr. Joe's commentary. That's all right, Laura. You can spread the news here. Feel free to spread the news here. It ain't a problem. Kay says, Ohio has SPAN, Single Payer Action Network, but as usual, they ignore us here. We need Nina. You do. We recently sent a contribution to Nina. Laura says, and we have knit them in support of Medicare for All candidates. Traveled to Seema Hernandez's Senate launch a couple of years ago. By the way, I've interviewed Seema a couple of times a few years back. We have crafted and organized the Medicare for All movement. And Amber says, right, we pay over $12,000 a year for insurance before we ever walk into a doctor's office. Boy, that's really amazing, since the average expenditure per person in Washington is only $10,000 per person. How is it costs you $12,000 a year for insurance when the cost per person is only $10,000? What is going on there? Jeff Denton says, I mean, if you pay over $12,000 a year for insurance in Washington and it only costs $10,000 a year, then people in Washington might save $4,000 a year, not $2,000 or $3,000, might even be $4,000. Jeff Denton says, the Red Berets have a lot to do with our affiliation and canvassing for national nurses over the years, and answered the strangely highly publicized pink pussy hats. I'm not sure why you would ask the question, but if you don't knit, you can purchase one and help raise funds for both the state and national efforts through our main fundraising mechanisms at wholewashington.org. Steve Day says, stop the party wars and help people think better. And Jeff Denton says, and there are unfortunately literally no guarantees that you will be reimbursed by your insurance company after going to see the doctor. Steve Wolfbrand says, love Whole Washington and the Red Berets. And Laura Fielding says, thank you, Steve. Stacy Van Veen says, you're awful cute, Laura, and that the red beret with the rosette. Laura says, healthcare.movie in case people want to see us lobby our federal reps. Kay says, I doubt Biden would sign it if it would come to him. He likes this bipartisan bill that sells off our infrastructure to private corporations. We sure don't need yet more privatization in this country. And Steve Day says, Grumbine grumbles, and Laura Fielding says, are we not going to be simultaneously pressuring to pass it nationally? Of course we are, every single day. Amber says, just because you pass a state single payer doesn't mean you can't still lobby for federal cash from here to eternity. It's not like the purse is suddenly closed. It was always up to us to open it. Absolutely, Amber, absolutely. Tweet that. Stacy says, I got into a fracas with some of that faction last week. While I love Stephanie, she can be rather aloof rhetorically, in my opinion. But MMT has created a bubble of sorts. Well, Stephanie is trying to stay out of the political fights. She knows that the MMT lens does not imply direct policy views on most things. Yes, at the core of MMT is the job guarantee program. Okay, but that, and getting rid of pay go for obvious reasons are just about the only two policies that come out of the MMT lens. All the rest involves using the MMT lens along with auxiliary assumptions to arrive at particular policies. But those policies are not part, of MMT. That's why I keep saying there is no implication, in MMT that suggests that the idea of Washington having its own Medicare for All program is not a good idea. That idea has to be judged on the merits in the context of the fiscal sustainability problem that is pointed up, by MMT. But there are answers to that fiscal sustainability problem. And all the nations that have fiscal sustainability problems and systems that are similar or better than Medicare for All is the answer. They all provide an answer to that problem. Kay says, Ohio is a shadow of its former self. I remember when we were at the top. Amber says she's a very busy lady, and because she's been in the MMT community for so long, she knows how to pick her battles. Yeah, well, she's also trying to pick her battles in order to forward the acceptance of MMT among the broader public. That is her real mission. And Amber says, happy birthday, Bonnie.
Oh, thank you.
And she gives you a number of wows. They look like wows. So what you have to do is understand what Stephanie's role is. She thinks one of the best things she can do is to advance MMT and give people the understanding that having a sovereign currency creates all kinds of policy space for all kinds of good things, including Medicare for All. That is Stephanie's mission. To the extent she endorsed any specific policies in the past, she did so as a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, of course, and his policy agenda, which she highly approved of. All you have to do to find out what she liked when it came to policy is to look at Bernie Sanders' policy agenda. Not necessarily, of course, his remarks on how to pay for things. She probably tore her hair out at those every time they happened. Steve Day says, the message is the discussion, not the grumblings. Stacey Van Veen says, if half of the U.S.'s population or even a third got into a Medicare compact, the rest of the people would want it too. Yeah, I think so. Even if a quarter. And I mean, if that West Coast group gets it, everybody's going to want it, and they're going to really tear their Congress people apart if they don't get it for them. Steve Day says regional considerations are important. Yeah, they're important in terms of building the blocks. They are important in terms of building the coalitions. Steve Day says it's got to help a good bit, calling it NEMA, National Improved Medicare for All. Yeah. Steve says, I think that's exactly how Canada did it, region by region, until finally their federal government had to go along. Actually, the federal government was helping to pick up the tab at various stages. In other words, the federal government in Canada was friendly to the national movement as it was going forward. But, as I said earlier, Steve, or later, actually from the point of your comment, there are only 9 provinces in Canada. There are 50 states here. It was easier to run the province by province thing in Canada than it would be to make a similar amount of progress here. On the other hand, here, there is the immediate possibility of, if one region becomes successful, people saying, screw it, let's get NEMA passed. That could easily happen. Laura says, can we talk about the numbers of dollars that will be required and working class donations will be required to primary all those corporately owned shills? I've donated to Bernie and tons of M4A candidates. I donate to Jason Call. Yes, we can talk about the numbers of dollars, Laura. Please tell us about the numbers of dollars. Kate, Kay Clark Ryan says, not crazy about Grumbine. Well, let's not talk about personal matters. We will not talk about personal things here. Stacy says, somebody noted recently that what we really want is Medicaid for all because it covers everything. I think this was a good observation. Well, not necessarily, because there's a connotation, to Medicaid. It's partly state, it's partly federal. It's mandated for the states. So it's not the same thing as the federal government simply picking up the whole bill. Also, the rates for doctors in Medicaid, will lower. So doctors are not in favor, of Medicaid for all, where they're fine, with Medicare for all because they're getting a better rate. They are generally fine, with Medicare for all. This is not 1947 anymore. That is to say, a majority of doctors in this country are for Medicare for all now. They have been since the early 2000s. But Laura Fielding says, redundant, but this is going to cost enormous sums of time, investment, and money, and we have to do it. But a success in 1 or 2 states will almost definitely mobilize people. I completely agree. I entirely agree. I don't know why the MMT people are ignoring the spillover movement effect of success in 1 or 2 states. States says we need to get rid of Clyburn and Hoyer. We need to get rid of Pelosi, Clyburn, Hoyer, Hakeem Jeffries, that whole team, with the possible exception of Catherine Clark, who has been a co-sponsor, of Medicare for All and the Green New Deal for some time now. Now, Hakeem Jeffries has been one too, but I think Hakeem Jeffries is kind of a spy in the CPC. I don't think that Catherine Clark is quite that, even though she's the assistant speaker. So Laura Fielding says, even people seeing us try to collect 400K signatures should at least inspire people. It certainly should. Steve Wolfbrand says 116 degrees in Portland. Are you fucking kidding me? And Laura says, on our initiative, as people sign, they can opt in to be added to our email and text banking, which means we can mobilize those new voters in the fold to NEMA actions and events. Kay says, at least you could go to the ER for heat stress. Amber says, the suffering elderly in my beautiful Washington state shouldn't have to wait. That doesn't mean I would stop fighting for all of you too. So do all of us. Laura Fielding says, potentially hundreds of thousands of new people brought into the fold through direct democracy. Carmen Muniz says, an M4A march has been canceled due to far-right extremist infiltration. Let me go find the link. You're kidding. Steve Day says, I cannot donate any longer to partying. I've helped directly get water to a Gaza family and learned today belabor to metal my roof against California wildfire is another $3,000 above the $5,000 I had by the skin of my SS and Virginia Treasury and VA Treasury Direct income. I'm sorry to hear that, Steve. Those are heavy costs. Heavy costs. Amber said, that has been debunked and made out to be something it's not. Joy did a video with Ron Placone today and cleared the air. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I'll certainly look at Joy's video. Steve Wolfbrand says, where you at? Laura says, yes, it was an infiltrator and connection to the organizer and event. The war immediately severed. Yes, I suggest people go watch by Ron's show from this morning. Thank you, Laura. Carmen Muniz says, but did you know that Gravel died? Yep, I did know that he died. I was really so sorry to hear that. He was a national monument. He was really something, that guy. Really something. Steve Day says, this is better than holding a conference on the ground. Steve Day, where you at that they want a metal roof? Laura Fielding says, nope. Additionally, you know what sabotages the agenda? People giving up hope because no one is fighting for them. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Steve Wolfbrand says, Grumbine, meh. Laura says, not to get too hard on the squad or failure to force the vote, but we have a severely demoralized movement. What is the cost of inaction? Laura, the cost of inaction is very, very high. But you were not, I don't think, a part of the counter movement to force the vote. Or maybe you were. I can't really recall whether you contributed to it. But, okay, if you'll remember, around January 3rd, we were trying to get the squad to replace Nancy Pelosi on January 3rd, and then get concessions from a more friendly successor. So you may remember the forced vote, hashtag replace Pelosi January 3rd, hashtag then force the vote. That's what we were trying to do, but Jimmy and the others would not listen. I kept on trying to get the message across. You were asking the squad to do something really big for too little gain. I think a movement would have been more successful that tried to get them to simply block Nancy Pelosi and cause her to be replaced. And yes, there was no danger that Kevin McCarthy would have become the speaker. Carmen says, here's the link. As far as I can tell, Salon is a reputable source. Yeah, usually it's pretty reputable. Medicare for All march called off after organizers say black white nationalists infiltrated the group. That is awful. That is really awful. Everybody was looking forward to that. Amber says, all the more reason to act now where we can. Gatekeeping your fellow activists isn't helping. Jeffrey Denton says, Dennis Miller, one of our Red Berets, Facebook group members in Healthcare for All Hawaii, has just announced that Graham Elwood will be attending the July 24th event with them in Honolulu. Hey, Honolulu. Laura says, exactly. And Carmen says, here's another hell of a issues, and gives a Facebook link. Thank you, Laura. Laura says, amazing, Jeffrey Denton. Steve Day says, Stephen underscored the dialogue between Chris, IDK, and Johnny Axum. Yeah, there was a dialogue that Johnny had with Chris Richards, I think. I'm not sure what Johnny said. I didn't get a chance to look at that. Amber says, our economy would boom with all the extra cash folks would have in their pockets instead of fattening up the profit margins of insurance companies. Yeah, I believe that, Amber. I mean, I really do. I think that Steve has been too concentrated at the national level. And of course, what Warren was saying, at the national level is probably correct, except his calling for a tax cut, to make up for it. He should have been calling for government spending to make up for it, in my view. But also, yes, at the state level, you give people that extra cash, it's going to do a fiscal multiplier number on the economy. Not as much, of course, as federal spending would, but a lot more than continuing to feed that money into the hands of the insurance companies. Jeffrey Denton says, precisely why Kelton calls it a massive tax break for the middle class, I would imagine. Yep. And she's not kidding. She's saying functionally, it's a tax break for the middle class. Tax break for the working class too, I think. Amber says that he's feigning attack when folks push back on his assertions. Yeah, he's, you know what he does. I'm not going to bring that into the conversation. He has a particular style, a certain style. If we choose to have someday a program on that particular style, then we can do that. But this program was not about his style. The program was about the substance of what he had to say. Jeffrey Denton says, who in the world promised anything? And I thought we were done with the what-if scenarios after Hillary Clinton was condemned in the court of public opinion when the paid astroturfing trolls kept trying to scare people with all of the what-ifs. Kay says, we have too many different states that do not agree to anything. Laura Fielding said, Senator Bob Hasagawa, not sure if I spelled exactly correctly. It doesn't look exactly right to me either. Maybe it has an H on the end, Laura. And Steve says, I love that they knit their own berets. Carmen says, got here a little late. What Steve is being referenced to? Grumbine / Firestone, so-called. Laura Fielding says, 12 billion annually in Washington state. Carmen says, so I read that the infrastructure bill is nothing corporate, but privatization stimuluses. It's nothing but, there's a lot of public-private, the corporatist stuff in there, but it's not the main bill. It's what Biden wanted was to be able to say that he passed a bipartisan bill. So he gave away a lot of stuff to the looters so he could say he was passing a bipartisan bill. What the progressives in Congress saying is that bill will not be taken up in the House, okay, until Biden passes the reconciliation bill. Steve Day says, Nina from Fanima, or Fielding says, excellent point. Kay says, Ohio used to have the best health care in the world until they privatized it. Shake my head, not at all now. And Laura says, Georgia Davenport, I hope you get a chance to listen to this live stream, particularly the portion regarding states Dr. Joe marks as having possibility, strong potential. So, Laura, there's no need for you to call me Dr. Joe. There is something that got going, okay, among people who always want to call me Dr. Joe. I don't really mind Dr. Joe, but I prefer Joe. I'm afraid. Laura says, and this is going to build the pressure for national. Yeah. I mean, it certainly would get people really encouraged if it passed in Washington, and it was going great guns in Washington, and then a couple of the other West Coast states got in there, and people were getting free health care at the point of service or nearly free health care at the point of service. It would be fantastic. Everybody was covered. I mean, everybody would be talking about what California did and what Oregon did and what Washington did. Yeah, it would be a party, a total party. Laura says, yes. And many of us are going to be demanding it with them and for them. Dostad says, 30,000 missing Indigenous children might be in makeshift graves at Catholic schools in Canada, not the 4,100 initially reported, meaning as many as 1 out of 5 sent to these schools never came home. My God. Sounds like a Holocaust, Steve.
That's true.
Ghoststart says, at least, well, this happened, I think, in the 19th century. Ghoststart said at least 4 churches were burned in the week after the bodies of nearly 1,000 children were discovered near let me get back. Sorry, I lost the thread. I'm getting back to your older comments. I'll get there. Please be patient. There it is. Okay, at least 4 churches were burned in the week after the bodies of nearly 1,000 children were discovered near schools run by the Catholic Church. Laura Fielding says, open the floodgates. Steve Day says, real progress in action, jump in for the push. Well informed with RPIA. Real progress in action, jump in for the push. Well informed with RPIA. Ohio says, Kay says Ohio is a damn mess. And Steve Day says, we'll hash this out tag. If people have Medicare for all, they're free to leave their job and start their own enterprises. Wonderful for the economy. Terry Cook says, to know what does on is what builds our foundation to build on. Fear is a lack of knowledge. God gave us the tool. Now stop our deepest downward spiral. Already stopped 6 years ago when an old gray buzzard with its fist raised high to all the packed stadiums in front. Oh, God. When searching for the Top Cat plan, you'll see one selection being the Comcast at the end. So I have the, I'm sorry, I can't get that. Kay says, Ohio's Medicaid expansion wants to keep people as poor as possible. Steve Day says, ranked choice voting. Jeff Denton says, all states are different, and Washington State's extremely lucky to be able to run a ballot initiative, I know. Because even if our bill miraculously made it through legislation, or if Cal Care's bill actually did, I don't believe there's any way that Governor Newsom or Governor Inslee would be allowed by their donors to sign the bills into law. It is much easier to intimidate the other representatives in your own state than it is to intimidate the representatives with the full support of both parties mutually. Jeff Denton says, we have already ran a ballot initiative in Washington, failed to reach the number of signatures we needed. So, but NEMA is what I think it is. National Improved Medicare for All is what it stands for. It's not a new acronym. It came to the fore when John Conyers introduced his HR 676 bill in 2017. It was a material improvement over previous versions of HR 676, and so PNHP, which helped to write it, called it National Improved Medicare for All, or NEMA. So the acronym dates, as far as I know, from 2017. That's when I started using the acronym. Jeffrey Denton says, yes, I found 116 countries of all different shapes and sizes, populations, and GDPs that have universal health care. And yes, they're all different also with respect to whether they're currency sovereigns or not. I believe that a heavy majority of those countries are not currency sovereigns and would all have, therefore, the fiscal sustainability problem. Yet, they have had their universal health care programs for decades. Steve says, only vote for socialists. Steve Day says, makes too much sense to fail. Kay says, no homeless in Cuba either. Amber says, at the end of the day, isn't single payer just taking the money you already spend, cut out the middleman, and work more efficiently? That doesn't take more revenue. You're working with what you already had. What you're working with is what you already spent. Yes. Okay. It's the money that we, the people, already had. Okay, and then give to other parties. We give to the state, okay, in taxes, so it can buy some things for health care. We give to the insurance companies to insure us so we can get the health care. Then we give, of course, for co-pays, okay, and for deductibles, okay, as well. So all of it comes out of our pockets. The middleman here is the insurance company, and that's where the savings are. Amber says, those countries also prioritize infrastructure. Yes, in general, they prioritize public goods as opposed to private goods, because they know when the public goods are there, private lives get better. People in a lot of these countries spend their lives outside in their communities. They're working or socializing in their communities. And they need to have the public facilities there to enrich their lives, and it does enrich their lives. Steve Day, looking up HR 1976, that's the number? Yes, that's the number. That's the Jayapal written bill that has something like 116, 117 co-sponsors already, and is getting, it was likely to get a lot more co-sponsors this summer as a result of the July 24th movement. The reason that Red Berets has created and formed relations with multiple Medicare for all groups around the country for the past 4 years is because we already have ran a ballot initiative and failed, and are now in the midst of a two-pronged approach, just like Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, sparking hundreds of Bernie-crats around the country each year for the past 4 straight years in a row to run for office and win on his platform of no corporate donations and supporting Medicare for all. And Jeffrey says, yes. That is exactly what Stephanie Kelton said in the clip that Joe ran. Amber says, that's refreshing because some never say they're wrong. I think that's what you were alluding to when I was saying that I could be wrong. Yeah. I learned that a long time ago. I could be wrong. It's no shame to say that you could be wrong. But if I think I'm right, I'm going to really give a tough defense of what I think is the case. I'm going to give a tough defense of that, and I'm going to give a fair deal to the person who says I'm wrong. I'm going to try not to misstate what they said. I have paraphrased Steve very, very closely in that particular live stream. That is what he said. I did not embellish. I did not add anything to it. You can judge the quality of what he said for yourselves. Oh, by the way, I was going to provide a link. I was really rushed when I started today. Okay, I fell behind some. And I had 2 links I wanted to share with you. One of those links was to Steph's video, and the other link was to Steve's video. I mean, I want you to look at Steve's video and then compare it with what I said he said. Now, there are a lot of things in his video that I did not say, and that's because they were not things about substance. All the points I made were the substance points that he made. The other points, okay, I simply ignored because I didn't want to get into a fight, okay, of personalities or into meta commentary on this aspect of what he said or that aspect of what he said, or you know what his motives were. Or this. I don't traffic in those kinds of things. What I traffic in is the arguments that people make and my evaluations of those arguments. That is what I do. Okay, and Laura Fielding says, and he also said, quote, whatever they are calling their bill, damn bill. Laura says, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for coming. And Amber says, hashtag leverage. Laura says, really appreciated knitting. Steve Day says, Bonnie, and sends you a heart.
Thank you.
Kay says, happy birthday, Bonnie. Hope you had a good one.
Thank you.
Well, we're really going to have a good one tomorrow, actually, because it was pretty imperative that, you know, I got this one out today. But we're really going to have a great day tomorrow. And we did have a great day today anyway.
Yeah.
We certainly did. We certainly did. Steve Day says, yep. And Jeffrey Denton says, yes, our transition period for Washington State's bill. We'll use the waivers to get the ball rolling, so the ACA is actually good for something other than the fact that medical bills are still the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States more than a decade later. Jeffrey Denton says, always says furiously and progressively. And Steve Day says, hashtag veto Biden, and adds another heart. Kay says, if New York State could do that, I would move there. New York State isn't far from it. They've got some people in the state legislature that are holding it up. But New York State is getting more progressive again, not just in the city, of course in the city, but outside in upstate also. things are trending left, and the conservatives have less control of the legislature than they have had for quite a long time. Jeff says, yes, Seattle was the third city to join the July 24th March for Medicare, and now there are more than 30 cities. Kay says, miss North Carolina badly, wish they would do that. Laura says, I have one of Laura's red berets. It's beautiful. We're waiting for one of Laura's. In fact, we've asked her to put aside 2 for us. 1 each. Steve says, my company's middleman on our health care lives in a fucking mansion up in the Hollywood Hills with the movie stars. I've been to that prick's house. Raises our rates every year. Laura says, this is so right, Jeffrey Denton. Dang, you're right. Red Berets have crafted in Washington for candidates ORWBC, Green Party, Progressive Dems. Amber says, family of 4 through employer-based health care, we pay more than 10K. Yeah, but then you've got to pay taxes on top of that. And you've got to pay copays and deductibles on top of that, right? So you're paying much more than 10K for a family of 4. I suspect for a family of 4, you might be paying $25,000. Anyway, Laura Fielding, Makshama Sawant, so socialist alternative, Dem socialists, etc. Yes. So yes, Jeffrey, you are so right. Thank you. Laura Fielding says, plus many people chose to only focus on the first half of Stephanie Kelton's comments, dismissing the second half. Steve Day says, no pay go. Steve Wolfbrand says, Grumbine rubs people the wrong way. Not a good rep for MNT. Yeah, but, he's organized this place with people who are getting educated, in MMT. And he has a share army. And they boost the attendance to his live streams and the podcasts. And that's valuable for the MMT people that he interviews because they can reach a lot of people. So that's where his power lies. It's in the size of the audience. Laura Fielding says, so she weighed in and has been ignored by people who want to keep arguing this is a race to the bottom. Yes, I know. Yeah, she weighed in, and I think she's a very honest person. Okay, I know her for quite a few years now. If she thought there was something wrong with the Washington program, such that it could not be successful, she would have said so. She said what she thinks. If one is not a currency sovereign, then it's going to be harder. And beyond that, she can't say too much without knowing the specifics of the situation, which, of course, she did not have time to investigate. Steve Wolfbrand says, Pago Losi. And Steve Wolfbrand said, I doubt if Newsom would go along, he's an ambitious SOB. And Pelosi's cousin or something, isn't he, Steve? Kay says, we should have let the South secede back then. We'd all be better off. Yeah, maybe if they had let their slaves all come north, then we probably would have been better off. Then if they wanted to have dictatorships there all over the South, it would have been, wouldn't have been any. I'm sorry. It's probably best the way it is. Only regrets I have is that we ended Reconstruction before it was done. I think the North needed another 25 years in the South, okay, in order to right things, with black people having a place in the legislatures all through that time. He says there would still be slavery in the South today, but yeah, I get the point. He says Clyburn is actively working against Nina Turner now. Yeah, I bet he is, because Nina's a big threat to him. Jeffrey says nonpartisan Washington Wolfpack, who I lobby for campaign finance reform, has by Red Berets in it. Bill Moo's Progressive Party of Washington has Red Beret members. New Washington Progressive Party has Red Berets in it. The People's Party of Washington has a Red Beret. 350 groups have the Red Berets. The Sunrise groups have Red Berets, but also lots of congressional candidates around the country, like Paula Jean and Sima Hernandez. In Texas, Amy Villela, who's running for Congress in Nevada.
SEMA? It's a red beret?
Yeah, Sima has a Red Beret.
When did that happen?
I guess it happened some time ago because Laura went down to Texas, I think, and gave her a Red Beret. Steve says Medicare isn't free. It's a good program, but they take it out of your SS payments, about $150 a month. I know, Steve. I've noticed. That's right. They take it out of our SS payments. Those are premiums. We're paying premiums. Steve says we could have taken in the slaves back then. Yeah, that wouldn't have been too popular, though, because there were lots of racists in the North, too. Jeff says, yeah, Joe, that was the Muncie, Indiana march that snuck in the supposed white supremacist, so a committee has been formed for screening purposes. Whoa, Amber says, I think we hit 117 here in southeastern Washington state. So hot. Yeah, that is really hot. It was we were about 91 or 92 here today. It felt like about 103, okay, according to the weather. I don't know if it felt like 103 or 104. But to me, it felt like it was 91, plenty hot. Steve says, at least lower the age limit to 50. Bernie wants 60. A good fucking deal. Yes, I completely agree, Steve. He and Jayapal didn't come in with enough. I would have been ecstatic if they had come in with 50, but I certainly think they should have come in with 55 at least. Steve says, yikes, they say it's a once in 1,000-year event. I suspect it's going to happen a lot more than once in 1,000 years. Jeff says, it's really cooled off way up here, a couple 100 miles from the Canadian border. Thank goodness. So hopefully it will keep going southeast. Thanks, Jeffrey, thanks. Amber says, lots of people in the PNW have metal roofs. My mother has one. What is the PNW? For those who don't know that slang. And Kay says, Bernie is trying to get what he can in this corporate dem mess we have. I think that Bernie often underestimates what he can get. I think he needs to bargain harder. I've always thought that. I thought in 2010, when he bargained over the Affordable Care Act, he got much too little. He was asking for $10 billion for community health centers. I thought he should have, in return for his vote, he should have gotten $100 billion. Too little, too little. Laura says, I absolutely pushing forward that first iteration, replace Pelosi. But yes, I did join strongly for force the vote. Yeah. Jeffrey says, even the real squad, Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk, and Gates, has to run things past their parents and relatives to decide any legislation they want to pass. And Laura says, I really want to thank Amber for introducing me to you, Dr. Joe. They're the doctor again. And also thanks to Jeffrey Denton. Okay, I'm going to tell you. The reason why I have that PhD on my Twitter is because I used to be a consultant, okay, in the knowledge management field in the early 2000s. Okay, and in that field, it was nice to have a doctorate. Okay? It helped you to get consulting jobs. Okay, it helped you to get students if you wanted to train, which, okay, was one of the things I did. And so that's why I put the PhD next to my name. But if that hadn't been the case, if I was involved in politics as I became in 2008, 2009, and I joined Twitter back then, I wouldn't have the PhD after my name. I would just have Joe Firestone. So, and also thanks to Jeffrey Denton and the wonderful woman who has apparently shared you to Red Beret's Facebook for quite some time. You see, I'm always on Twitter. Yes, I know you're always on Twitter the whole day long. Okay, and actually, I am more on Twitter now also. I don't generally post to Facebook. I stream to Facebook. But other than that, I don't usually post to Facebook. Steve Wolfman said, the squad is 5 or 6, but Manchin is only 1, and his tail wags the dog. Force the vote, and let's see where everyone stands. What could it hurt? Well, I'm all for forcing the vote. The idea I had was to replace Pelosi first, and then negotiate with her successor for lots of votes, not just the Medicare for All vote, lots of votes, rules changes, important committee assignments, a real price. And also, no threatening Pelosi. I didn't want anybody threatening Pelosi. I just wanted them to replace her. First block her, keep on blocking her until she withdrew from the candidacy.
Ask her to vacate.
And now I'm for asking her to vacate the chair. I want the people to run a vacate the chair maneuver on her. Get her out of the speaker's position right now. Get new leadership in the House. The one I really want for the House right now, there are a number of people I would find to be pretty acceptable. Okay, but the one I really want, who I think could get in, because she even has contacts among the problem solvers, is Debbie Dingell, okay, of Michigan. She's strong for Medicare for All. It's a family thing with her. She's strong for the Green New Deal. She'd make Biden's life hell. That's what we need, somebody who'd make Biden's life hell. Lana says, Johnny said he wanted to talk to Richards on the phone to explain further after Richards said MMT was Reaganomics. It went on to say just because he doesn't like RP, but MMT is still truth. Yeah, so he wanted to explain that to Richards. I had a couple of exchanges with Richards today, okay, on Twitter, explaining to him that there were very few Marxists, okay, in the MMT crowd, and I gave him a link to an Australian Marxist who's an MMTer as well. He's a wonderful writer. That's the head economist, Peter Cooper. Steve says Jeffrey is very cool. Jeffrey says nobody spends 40 years in politics refusing to join another party does not know exactly what would happen if they ran for president. And that's why the two-pronged approach, starting a political revolution, having to sign a loyalty pledge to keep it going, after 4 years of Bernie-crats getting elected that the gatekeepers don't talk about, because you can change a political party from the inside. Just ask the Clintons. Amber says, I agree, and it actually deleted the comment before you read it. Kay says, Biden sucks. Steve Wolfbrand says, you are Dr. Joe. All right, Steve. All right. I lost the thread again. Laura says, soon you'll get the 2 red berets, Joe. Great, Laura. That's great. Thank you. And sorry, I lost the thread again, but I'll get there. So Amber says, I agree, and actually deleted the comment. Kay says, Biden sucks. Steve says, you or Dr. Joe. Joe it is. I'll only say Dr. Joe occasionally for humor now. Thank you, Laura. Kay says, I call you ho as I feel we're friends. Steve says, does Dr. Joe like the Back to the Future guy? Back to the Future guy wasn't Dr. Joe, was he? He was Dr. somebody else, right? And Jeff says, Steve Wolfbrand, but Dolores and Amber Great Co. are the ones who get after it. Okay, it's Amber Grego. Are the ones who get after it. I just try to keep up with them. Steve Wolfbrand says, we love you, brother. I see you around. Ghostot says, Clyburn endorses rival to Nina Turner in Ohio special election. Yeah, Clyburn will endorse anybody Hillary will endorse, right? I mean, Clyburn is a captive of the Clintons. It says, did Kay see that Ohio news about the cable companies trying to kibosh expanding internet access? I don't think she is one Twitter, but I tagged Dr. Joe, posted by Stavros. Yes, you did, Lana. I saw that. You see, Stavros could be a good guy, right? Laura Fielding, the Daily Beast, just dropped an article saying Medicare for All organizing group besieged by Nazis. Holy goddamn fucking job. Besieged by Nazis. Trolls. They're total trolls, those people. Ghostot says, don't get me started on Ohio. My God, I don't want to be distracted, but I need to go read that article. Clinton-owned Daily Beast. Steve Wolfbrand says, Cuba's very cool. No homeless, great education and healthcare. That's a pretty heavy police state. Believe me, I lived there for months and went to university in Havana. The arts are elevated to a very high level, though. How many years ago did you go there to study? Might have changed since then, right? Might have changed. Lana says, I am never wrong. Waiting for lightning strike. Haha. And then I have those 2 links I gave, the link to Steph and the link to Steve. Jeffrey Denton says it's called promoting the general welfare and infrastructure is not just bridges and roads. The very first sentence to the preamble of the Constitution says promote the general welfare, which all members of Congress have signed and sworn KNLs to uphold, but are being paid but legally not to do, therefore committing treason. Well, there are some who argue the preamble is not part of the Constitution. It's obvious why they argue that. Laura Fielding says, myself and 3 others march for Medicare for organizers will be on Vanguard tomorrow. Please look them up on YouTube if you aren't following, and share it out. But Laura, what time will you be on Vanguard tomorrow? What time? Amber says BTS, the Vanguardians, actually, what it is, right? It's the Vanguardians you're going on, right? The Vanguardians program. And Amber says BTS has a call to action to take MMT local. That's where we should be at our city council school board, working with community organizers, taking MMT to the streets. You want to talk about getting MMT to connect with real life and real issues. That's the way, and I commend Whole Washington and Red Berets. I says, we're going to cover the details of all the marches on July 24th, but this will take up some oxygen. And Lana says, Lana says, happy birthday to Bonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. And Kay says, Northern New York used to be a beautiful place, but years ago when I went through there. Yeah, it is beautiful there. It's still beautiful there. I haven't been there for years, but I'm sure there are certain parts of upper New York State that is still very, very beautiful. Laura Fielding says, soon. Yes, you'll get the 2 Red Berets, Joe. Thank you, Laura. And Jeffrey says, that's because Scott Denoyers is a Red Beret, and they held one hell of an event and die in there in upstate New York. Jeffrey Denton says, I forgot Socialist Alternative. They have Red Berets as well. I'm sure there are even more progressive groups in our state that have them that I haven't thought of at the moment. Steve Wolfman says, Cuba's a mixed bag. If you hit a cow on the road, you're in big because they're very valuable and belong to the state. Weird shit like that. Overall, nice and getting better. Carmen Muniz says there is still slavery in the South, but most of the brothers are in prison performing slave labor. That's true. That's true. There is still slavery in the South. Socialism is gaining big support among the younger people of all parties now. It is. Ghostart says power cables are literally melting in Portland. Stacy says Pacific Northwest. That's the power company there. Jeffrey says Bernie is protecting Bernie Kratz. Do you think he spent 40 years in politics not knowing that the bombs would keep falling when he was forced to endorse Joe Biden to keep the revolution going? Yeah, I think he has been protecting. So he says, in Cuba, you don't actually own your car. It's a privilege to have one. The state has the pink slip. They have their reasons, though. Amber says, the Pacific Northwest. Carmen says, happy birthday, Bonnie Boo.
Thank you.
And gives the hug sign. And Stacy says, PhD, post-hole digger. Kay says, Pegosi needs to go. He says, I don't do Twitter. My head might explode. He says, I don't either, Steve Wolfbrand. Jeff says, House of Representatives voted unanimously for marijuana legalization in December after the DNC platform committee flat out rejected a mandate from over 90% of the people to legalize marijuana. Yeah, I know. The Democrats knew they were gaining a majority in the Senate. That's why they voted and pulled a 180. And what did it change? Whatsoever. Nothing. Ghostart says, according to GISA, the data sharing initiative for corona and influenza virus sequences, the Delta variant has been identified in 78 countries. Yeah, that's going to be the dominant variant all over soon. And Carmen says, Commie John is a Marxist on Facebook. I like following him. He's also an RP guy, and he's also an MMT guy. He says, you can find me in TikTok as SPS, Stephen Paul Stinks, but many hundreds of hits. And Carmen says, I meant an MMT Marxist, yes. Carmen says, well, Joe, are you doctor of what, love? I'm sorry, I don't recognize the icon from this interface. It looks like it's hearts. Are you Bonnie's doctor? Okay, of heart, love? Yeah, I think I am. Amber says, Doc Brown. Steve says, yep, Joe is from the future. Laura Fielding says, thank you very much for this amazing live stream. I do have to go read. My anxiety is high because the trolls are all over my Twitter feed. I just want to find out what kind of troll sweet job it is. Vanguard time is not confirmed yet. The channel is called Vanguard. Supporters are called Vanguardians. Thank you. Happy birthday, Bonnie. Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much for coming, Laura. It was a pleasure to have you here tonight and to see all your comments. Ghost Stud says, Doctor, ain't there nothing I can take? I said, Doctor, to relieve this bellyache. I said, Doctor, ain't there nothing I can take? I said, Doctor, now let me get this straight. Steve Wolfbrand says, happy birthday, Bonnie. Sweet dreams all. Jeffrey Denton says, thank you so much for the time and work you've put into this, helping us, with our initiative and defend against people who are obviously not who they claim to be. Happy birthday, Bonnie. Thanks to Laura and Georgia and Amber and Dolores and the rest of the original real progressives, MMT people that I've interacted with daily and have for years in the PIN Progressive Independent News Network. So that's you, Jeff Denton. I didn't realize that was you. So I don't have to worry about sharing to PIN, right? I mean, I can always do that now. Okay, because I know you're not going to report me to Facebook. Carmen says, I heard the warplanes again tonight. Sigh. Amber says, we've had roads buckle from the heat and few outages here. Oh, the Pacific Northwest, PNW Pacific Northwest. But our electrical capacity is thanks to the job programs of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, building hydroelectric dams. Yeah. Electric capacity is great. Steve says, Doc, we got to get back to the future. And Dolores says, happy birthday, Bonnie.
Thank you.
You should have another glass of wine. Dolores says, thank you and good night, all. Happy birthday, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Steve Wolfbrand says, put the lime in the Coke. Kay says, thank you for another great discussion. I love you all. We love you, Kay. We love you, Kay. Steve says, very fun show tonight. Thank you, Steve. It was very fun for me, too. So good night, everybody. Have a wonderful night. I will be back tomorrow at the usual time. Hopefully, I won't be talking about what Steve said. Steve Wolfbrand said, have 2 glasses. Well, I have to watch my wine till I get a go-ahead from my doctor because I've been taking, a new medication for a while, and he's been waiting for my liver function tests to reach a particular level before he will give me a further go-ahead. Jeffrey Denton says, I made Dolores an editor, and I moved into Joy Cook Petralda's spot, one of the co-founding main editors to PIN, God rest her soul. Yeah. That was really unexpected.
Joy? Is Joy all right?
Savage Joy, is still all right, except for her, severe healthcare problems. But there was another Joy who was, at RP, and but she passed away, and that was unexpected and very tragic. Lana says, good night, and she says, rest in peace, Joy. Or rest in power, Joy. Amber says, good evening. Thank you for coming, Amber. It was great that you could make it. And good night to you, Steve. And thank you for coming. It was great that you could make it. Good night, everybody.